Hi, I'm Gary Ford from Tiger Hobbies Limited. Welcome to part 3 of our Spitfire at 90 video series. This time we shall look at model Spitfires, both plastic kit and diecast, on sale at Tiger Hobbies Limited. I will reflect on the previous 2 episodes briefly. So part 1 covered the very basic marks of Spitfire, and this could be handy if you're a modeller when helping to choose your next Spitfire subject. In part 2, we looked at the combat side of the Spitfire in World War II, but rather than going for the popular Mark 1, Mark 2 during the Battle of Britain, or perhaps Mark 9s over D-Day, we went for the less covered Spitfire Mark 5 and its tough battles against the Focke-Wulf 190 during those infamous fighter sweeps of 1941-42. As you can see from the display, there are no Airfix Spitfires, and that's nothing against Airfix, of course, and I'm sure other content creators will be talking about nothing else when it comes to models. And I suppose you cannot blame them, as Airfix is such an iconic UK brand. But I thought we would look at the many other brands that cover the Spitfire subjects, and in many cases better. But there's nothing wrong with Airfix Spitfires, of course. They're a fantastic range of kits. Before looking at the models, I thought I would look briefly at the history of scale models leading to the Spitfire models we love today. Plastic kit hobby was preceded by the diecast aviation models for about 15 years, as the first direct injection polystyrene models did not appear until the early 1950s or the late 40s in the USA. But the genesis of the plastic hobby we know today started in the early 1930s with a company called Skybirds. Skybirds produced a series of 1/72 scale models, and this is based on a 6-foot human being 72 inch, times it by or divide it by 72, hence the pilot or the human would be 1 inch tall. This would lead to the standard scale for non-flying model aircraft in that pre-war period, and even today known as the gentleman's scale. And most of the World War II recognition models that were produced by Frog and Skybird during the war for the Royal Air Force would be in 1/72. Skybirds are what would be known today as multimedia kits, made from metal, wood and other materials. But by 1937, they produced what will be recognised as the first ever 72nd scale Spitfire, not long after its first flight itself in 1936. The next company already mentioned was of course Frog Models, who came along at a similar time in the early 30s, but concentrating on rubber-powered flying models. In fact, Frog stands for Flies Right Off the Ground. But in the mid-1930s, they released a series of 1/72 scale models in both kit form and pre-built that will be later called non-flying penguin models or just penguin models, and would by 1939 have about 30 models in the range. These were closer to the models we know today, better detail, made of a very early acetate cellulose plastic, with instructions, details, small metal parts if applicable. They will of course not be on sprues, but in little compartments in the box, with the wings and fuselage in a slightly longer compartment. And in 1939, Frog released its own version of the submarine Spitfire in the Penguin range. And in fact, the last aircraft model produced before war stopped production was the Wellington bomber. They also did things like hangars and airfield accessories, so quite ahead of their time. By 1839, a German called Edward Simon stumbled across a polymer accidentally when distilling an oily substance from the resin of a Turkish sweet gum tree. But it was not until the 1930s that a German chemical company known as IG Farben, less said the better, later known as BASF, looked at this polystyrene plastic to replace metal parts in production. And it was World War II that saw the rise of this and other man-made materials, including nylon clothing. The founder of Airfix, Hungarian Jewish immigrant Nicholas Kove, and Kove was anglicised from his original Hungarian name, who came to the UK in the mid to late 30s. He was working at his factory in Halden Place in London with rubber and air-filled products. Hence, he called his company Airfix to be at the top of the telephone directory and in trade listings. But after the war, he started to use the new polystyrenes and acetates to make what would be known today as Tupperware. He made things like plastic combs and bowls and things like that. But in 1946, a US company called Hawk made what could be recognised as the first modern injection plastic kit, a Curtiss racer. Soon after that, companies such as Lindbergh and Renwall came onto the market. And in the early 50s, a company called Aurora came up with quarter scale, or what we know today as 1/48 scale. And they produced in 1952 a F9F Panther jet that was still operational in Korea at the time. And in 53, turned their attention to the World War II warbirds. So P-40 Kitty Hawk, or Warhawk, sorry, BF-109s, P-38s. And in 1954, a quarter-scale Spitfire, BTK. Does this sound familiar? In the UK, Airfix produced a tractor model pre-built for Massey Ferguson and soon released it as a plastic kit through its Woolworths distribution. And by 1952, Airfix had designed and built their first, what we recognise, first Airfix kit, the Golden Hind. And then, controversially, Airfix produced a Spitfire, BTK. Some say 1953, others 1955. And I do believe on the Airfix website it says 1953. But strangely, the tooling had exactly the same layout as the larger Aurora kit as far as parts go. And even the moulded pilot in two halves attached to the fuselage. Evidence now looks to be as the Aurora was the first kit, and so the Airfix one should have come out in 1955. Also, the catalogue number for that Airfix model followed a model that was produced in 54, I do believe a Rolls Royce. In 1959, Airfix released, compared to BTK, a much better model, as BTK was a very crude model, Aurora one as well. It wasn't even an actual Spitfire as such, it was a cross between Spitfire Mark 1s, Mark 5s and Mark 9s. But they actually produced in 1959 an actual Mark 9. And this would remain in production with Airfix for almost 50 years, till it was replaced in sometime in the noughties with the current Airfix Mark 9 in 72. But strangely, Airfix did not cover the Battle of Britain period, certainly into the late 70s, in 1/72nd scale of course. It was Frog that released a Spitfire Mark II of the Battle of Britain period in 1959, same time as Airfix released the Mark 9 Spitfire. And in fact, Frog, by the late 60s, very early 70s, had a very reasonable range of Spitfires. In fact, probably the best Spitfire range of any of the model manufacturers. They had a Mark 1A, a 5A, a Mark 14, a Mark 8 and a Mark 9. But in 1970, Airfix announced a 1/24th Spitfire Mark 1 Battle of Britain with striking artwork by the artist Roy Cross, known as the first of the super kits. But this model was let down by a somewhat flat wing. Modellers had to spar the wing themselves to get the right dihedral. I don't think it was Airfix not knowing the shape of the actual Spitfire wing. I think it was to do with the actual size of the model and the machine producing the parts at the time. In fact, when you look at that 1/24th Spitfire, don't get me wrong, it's a very detailed kit with interior detail and the cockpit, a nice engine and pilot. It's just that the wing was quite flat, or didn't quite sit the right shape. And with a Spitfire, the wing is the most important part of that aeroplane. Airfix then started to upgrade its Spitfires in the 70s, so we got a Mark 5 RFD Donald Duck, and then in the late 70s in blister pack, and later a little box in the 1980s, which was the Spitfire Mark 1 Battle of Britain. They then released an upgraded Mark 5 in 48 scale in 1983, along with their other warbirds such as the 109 and the Mosquito, as Airfix at last started to get into what is the popular 148 market. It was the 90s that saw a rise in Spitfire models from other manufacturers in numbers, from companies like Tamiya, Azigawa, Revell and many others. And in fact, some of these kits, especially the Tamiya and Azigawa ones, were for years considered the best kits. But it's not until the teens that Edward entered with their Spitfire Mark 9 and Mark 8. And not until the 2020s, at last we got a first-class 148 Spitfire Mark 1 from both Tamiya and Edward. Earlier, Airfix had issued in 148 the FR22 and 24, later Seafires, FR46 and 47 at the end of the 90s, which are still considered fantastic kits. But it wasn't until the 2020s that Airfix suddenly started upgrading their Spitfire tooling with a new 148 Spitfire Mark 1, Mark 5 and later Mark 9s, and also Spitfires in 1/72nd scale. Diecast models have been out since Dinky toys in the 1930s, including a Spitfire released just pre-war, that's used also to help fund real Spitfires in the Spitfire drives, when towns bought their own Spitfires in the early part of the war. In the late 60s, with the Battle of Britain movie, we finally got a fairly nice dinky Spitfire with working undercarriage and spinning propeller. And Korg released their 1/72nd scale version in the late 90s as part of their aviation archive range. There were things like Spitfires from things like Franklin Mint, of course, and Danbury Mint, but these tend to be very, very expensive. Hobbymaster, that came around in about 2006, by 2009 had entered the 148 Diecast Spitfire game with a Mark 14. But then since released Mark 1s, Mark 2s, 5As, 5Bs, 5Cs, 9Bs, Cs, Es, the Mark 8, the PR11, the Mark 18 and the PR19. Nearly all major plastic kit manufacturers have Spitfires in their range. Revell, Italieri, ICM and many, many more. Plus the basic P51 Mustangs, PF109s, P47s, FW190s, FU Corsairs and obviously Zeros. Often you get the cry from modelers, "Oh no, not another Spitfire." But the real sad fact is, for every Hurricane that Tiger Hobbies sells, we still sell about 10 Spitfires. So having a Spitfire in your range as a model manufacturing company is an absolute must, along with the bread and butter fighter planes from World War II, such as the FW190 Mustang. The latest companies to enter the Spitfire model market are Qatari in 132 and IBG in 172. Both these have pushed the levels of details to new levels in their respective scale. There's another manufacturer just about to release, I think it's called DBMK. They may be doing a 32nd scale late Mark Spitfire, either 14 or 20 series, and I'm sure that will come to fruition quite soon. So, now we've covered a bit of the history of the Spitfire models, both die-cast and plastic. I thought I'd have a look at some of the models that we've got for sale at Tiger Hobbies. So everything you see now on the camera is in stock in reasonable quantities at Tiger Hobbies. So let's work from left to right, shall we? Down on the left, bottom left, is the new IBG Spitfire Mark 1 early, and this is the beginning of the saga, so it Spitfires over Dunkirk, the first time the Germans met the Spitfire in combat. Early PRs had flown over France in 1940 in the Battle of France, but no Spitfires until Dunkirk. You can recognise these by their black and white wings. They're often used for identification for British anti-aircraft gunners. Just above that are a couple paint sets by Vallejo. We don't do a lot of paints at Tiger. We tend to leave that to some of the more specialist companies. But we do stack the very basics. We do sell the Tamiya X and XF range. So the Tamiya X is more like your glossy colours, and the XF is more your mattes and satins. So if you're going to paint a Warbird with Tamiya, you're going to use generally the XF range. But the Vallejo, which is water-based acrylic, is one of now the leading brands of paint. Now, generally we only sell the individual paint pots to our trade customers, as there's a minimum purchase of 6 of every colour you've got to buy. But we do sell to the public, obviously, the paint sets. And the paint sets generally consist, the aviation ones do at least, of 8 pots of paint. And as you can see, we've got a Fleet Air Arm colours, so you've got the old sewage and slime throughout the war, as it was called. Just next to that is the Battle of Britain Royal Air Force colours. And just above that is actually Battle of Britain Mark 1 Spitfire, as mentioned earlier, by Tamiya, along with the Edward that came out recently. Now that's got a little 148 Austin Tilly, a little bit wrong really, but inaccurate, of Tamiya. as the Austin Tilley never served in the Royal Air Force during the war, we use Standard and Ilman Tilleys. But it really makes no difference. It's a periodic vehicle with a Spitfire. It looks the part. And it is a really lovely kit. And that retails for around about $39.99. Just above that is an Italieri 1/72nd scale Mark 5, Mark 9. So you can build both aircraft in that. So you've got like separate engines. As I mentioned earlier in my part 1 video about different tails and different engines and different wings. What you get in there, you can build it's probably going to be it is by look of the cannon and the stub, it's going to be a C wing. So, but you've got different engines and oil coolers and radiators to make either the Mark 5 or Mark 9. Great value, around about the £10 or £12 mark. Just next to that is a tall model standing up, and that is one of the newer Qatari models. We're waiting for the container to land, which should land next week, and that's got the new Spitfire 132 Mark 5 early. This is a Battle of Britain Mark 1. Aces, flown by Squadron Leader Brian Lane of 19 Squadron. Late in the Battle of Britain, when they were based at a place called Falmere, one of the satellite airfields at Duxford. He was only 21, 22 when the youngest Squadron Leader of the Battle of Britain. But you look at that picture, he looks absolutely haggard, poor soul. You know, the pressure of not only being a fighter pilot in those dark days of 1940, but leading men into combat. In the centre, just to the right of the Qatari, is the Tamiya 1/32nd scale Spitfire Mark 9C. This is not a cheap model, it's £120. But if you're going to do a project on a Spitfire, this is the one. It's as good, if not better, than the new Airfix 1/24th Mark 9, which we do hold in stock. And don't get me wrong, the Mark 9 from Airfix is an incredible kit and good value at about just under £100. But this is kind of known by the model reviewers as possibly the best Spitfire out there. Just below that, there are two more Tamiya Spitfires, a Mark 8 and a low back 16. These are slightly newer tooling. Not that the original Spitfire is not that old, but these are slightly newer toolings, but they're at about $134.99. Above the Spitfire, Tamiya Spitfire Mark 9, is the IBG Black Box Spitfire. Again, a wonderful set, around about $49.99. You get two Spitfires, a Mark 1 and a Mark 2, from the Battle of Britain, 1940. But it's full of extra parts and 3D upgrade parts. It's a wonderful model. And not only that, but all the parts in that box, you can upgrade so many different model Spitfires. So you've got older Airfix Spitfires or older models in general. You can upgrade with new propellers, new clear parts, new tails, new exhaust sacks and the like. Just to the right of that are two Edward kits, which are the weekend version. So just down on the left, I forgot to mention the Edward Spitfire 9E, which is a Profi pack. So with Edward, you get weekend packs. You can see the Mark 5 and Mark 2 just upon the right. And they're the similar package to the Airfix. So the Airfix ones are around about $29.99. You get a box, you get plastic packs, you get details, instructions, you know, a basic kit. These are very similar. And you get exactly the same amount of quantity of parts and accessories in there as you do the Airfix one. But these are just £20. Superb value. And in fact, the Profi pack down on the left, excuse me, that's the same price as the Airfix one, $29.99. But here, you get 6 or 7 decal options, you get cockpit masks, you get other accessories to really detail your Spitfire. And there's also a limited versions where you get, for about £60 or so, you get two 148 Spitfires, again, lots of accessories. And there's even a Royal class, even more expensive, with even more stuff thrown at it. Down up on the, just below on the right, you'll see a Special Hobbies. This is a Submarine Seafire Mark 15. Should be, of course, according to our part 1, should be down as Mark XV, but it's a minor point. But this covers a Fleet Air Arm and Royal Canadian Navy Spitfire 15, post-war, of course. They entered service with the Royal Navy Fleet Air Arm during the war, but didn't actually see operational service, or not combat anyway. And I do believe served in Korea. Special Hobbies in 48 scale does some interesting Spitfires, like Mark 12s, Mark 17s, and they do a great range of that other later naval aircraft post-war, though it actually started in the war, the Fairey Firefly. And Tiger Hobbies will be doing a lot more special hobbies. And they're about $24.99, so again, quite good value. Just down on the right is a early Spitfire PR, A, B and E. And there's also a C model. The early PR Spitfires, this is the first time some of the early PRs have been done in plastic kit formed by IBG. Like I said, the IBG models are around about $23.99, but what you get is so many parts, so much detail, that it really has set the 72nd scale Spitfire world afire with its detail. Kind of IBG Spitfires came under the radar about 4 or 5 months ago, but now everybody's talking about them. We've got a, down there on the right is a little budget Ella Mark 16 for about £10. Again, great value. On the Diecast models, I've just got 4 that are in stock now. We've got more coming, of course, and we have actually got lower numbers of other items as well. But we've got, on your bottom right, we've got a Spitfire Mark 1 in 48 scale from Hobby Master. This is a Flight Lieutenant Hughes 234 Squadron. And down on the left, you've got a Spitfire Mark 5 VC Trop by Royal Air Force Desert Ace and Neville Duke, who, as I mentioned previously, went on to break the airspeed record in the Hawker Hunter. On the turntable, slowly going round, is the Panzerkampf Legion Mark 5 RFD Donald Duck, which is $24.99. And also going round is a Oxford Mark 9 Spitfire. This time a late Spitfire 9E, clipped winged. So just like the upgrade of the Mark 5 to the Mark 5C LF or LF Mark 5C, they did it also with the late Spitfire 9Es. Clipped wing to increase roll rate, speed and acceleration at the lower level, optimised for the lower level. So this has been 1944, based at Manston, ready for D-Day, or just before or just after. As you see, it hasn't got invasion stripes on. So it's not actually over the D-Day period. But it's a late war Mark 9. And again, really good value, around about $21.95. The only problem with Oxford models, and they are lovely models, is they are flight display only. So you don't get the option of undercarriage as you do with Panzerkampf Legion. So you can, with Panzerkampf Legion, you can have undercarriage up, undercarriage down. But I quite like the Oxford ones. They're just some nice model aeroplanes. So, once again, thank you for taking time to watch this video, part 3 of our Spitfire 90 series. The next video, coming soon, will be, I've got all the models behind me ready to set up, is the Hawker Hurricane. I'll probably do it in 2 videos. We're going to cover the Hawker Hurricane, the workhorse of the Royal Air Force, and held the line as the Royal Air Force primary day fight in the Far East until 1944, and actually stayed in Royal Air Force service with 6th Squadron flying can openers as a Mark 2C with a 4 20-unit cannons and carrying bombs until about 1947 in what was then Palestine. So once again, thank you for watching this video, the Spitfire 90 series. Thank you.